Okay, recording has started.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Welcome to the June 11th, 2025 meeting of the Issaquah Environmental Board. I'm Alex Tigner, and I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. Due to the hybrid format of today's meeting, I'd like to start by providing some guidelines. We have participants in the room as well as those attending virtually. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. For those in the room, please raise your name card to indicate an interest to speak. For those attending virtually, mute your microphone when not speaking. If you have technical issues, please try joining the meeting using a different device or use the call-in information in the meeting invite to call into the meeting. Board members attending virtually, please indicate a desire to speak using raising your hand or typing a question or comment. And we will summarize agreement around recommendations at the end of each topic and note if there is any dissent. Will you take attendance?
Absolutely. Tom Anderson.
Here.
Nancy Davidson.
Here.
Tommy DeVoe has an excused absence. Rajgat Pandey.
Here.
Kieran Pan.
Here.
Rena June.
Here.
Don McWilliams has an excused absence. Dixie Bear.
Here.
Alex Lee Tigner. Ann Newcomb. Keith Gonzalez. And John Smith.
Here.
Oh, I didn't even see you jump on, John. Surprised me. Great. Back to you, Alex. We do have quorum.
All right, we will move on to approval of the minutes. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes of the May 14th meeting? If not, then they are approved by the word of the
Consent.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to move on to public comments. I think we have one person in the room. Is there any online?
Nobody online has indicated that like to do public comments, so I think we just have one in the room.
Okay, where do you want me?
Would you like to come up front?
I will if that's the place.
Yeah, that's for sound quality.
Please state your name, address, and I'm letting you know that speak clearly and pause frequently, limit to 5 minutes.
Connie Marsh, I live on Squawk. One is the new capital improvement plan, which for some reason didn't come to you all this year, I don't think. Anyway, they want to repave the parking lot. And I know y'all look at the wetland that the parking lot is in over here and say, why in the world do we have a parking lot in a wetland? But they want to repave it instead of fixing it and getting out of the wetland. So I object. If the city is going to be green, it should be green itself, not conveniently green. So that's just number one. I looked at the checklist thingy that y'all are supposed to be using to judge whether the city is doing the right thing. And I find myself, again, if we're green, then we should be talking about really how we're doing. And so I can talk about the mitigation efforts that the city is doing for development just right off my fingertips. We have a Costco gas station wetland that the beavers have taken over and it's turned into a lake, right? And then we have the, widening of, no, it's the roundabout that's in the same place that the beavers have taken over and it's turned into a lake. They've given up on the mitigation efforts because they weren't working, and Fish and Wildlife has said, well, okay, let's see what happens. Is that a successful mitigation? Are we getting what we expected, or do we have leftover impacts that we are not talking about because we are not being told about them? You have a whole slew of development along Newport Way that was supposed to be being monitored for their environmental reparations that they had to do for their harm. So far, they're on year 7, maybe 8, and they are nowhere near close to getting where they were supposed to be. The creek, Schneider Creek, was supposed to be being sinuous, and now instead it's just grooving into the ground even further in a very straight line, which is not what was supposed to happen. So I want those conversations. And I want to be able to discuss how we're going to make our code better so that we never do that again. So the chart fails as far as I'm concerned, and I'm wondering where these things that I am talking about are on that chart, or why, more so, why they are not on that chart. Senate Creek, all the trees going down, all of those things. Okay, and last, I want to talk about the tree code. And I've been jibber jabbering with everybody around, and there's not really anybody who likes the tree code, but they all dislike it for such a variety of reasons. It's very complicated. It's the small lot thing. It's the we have too much acreage thing and we can't handle it. It's too complicated. It's too expensive. And then the most recent one I have is, well, you know what? When we say people have to landscape, there's nobody reviewing the landscape plan so that they don't plant their darn evergreen trees 3 feet from the foundation of the house, knowing that in 5 years, you're going to have to go through the process of taking down these trees. So we also need a preventive component in there within our landscaping that includes, don't be stupid, and future fire hazard areas. So if we want to actually keep 5 feet from around everybody's buildings, then we should not allow people to plant within those 5 feet. Conclusion for all of this is, I think we should go with some simplification. Take a tree out, plant a tree. Take a landmark tree out, plant 2. Special attention for small lots, special attention for really big areas to make it easy. And then I think we need some judgment on how much does a tree permit cost? Why does it cost so much? And the goal is for people to get a permit to take down a tree because the system is easy and makes sense to them. I think we are nowhere near that. And so with those very simple fixes, forget the zoning changes, forget all of that, have those discussions a little later. Fix 3 things and move on because we've spent enough money working on this stuff. Hey, thanks. I sound sort of invigorated. I need a nap.
Is student presentation.
Wonderful. Well, so we're joined today with some fabulous student presenters who are going to be sharing with y'all about all of the really wonderful work that they've done this last year. So we have 3 different student presentations. So each of them will get a chance to present, and then we'll have time for folks to ask any questions if you'd like to. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ava and Bridget to first talk about geocaching and Issaquah.
You. Do you want us to go?
You're fine sharing from there. That's good.
Okay, thank you. My name is Bridget Vesley. I'm a junior at Gibson Neck High School.
My name is Ava Magnuson, and I am a sophomore at Gibson Neck High School.
And this year, our internship was with Stacy at the City of Issaquah Sustainability. And yeah. So our main project this year has been the Issaquah Geo Tour. And a lot of you may be wondering, what is geocaching?
Yeah, so geocaching is kind of like treasure hunting. You go onto the app, you sign up. There's a little map you get to see geocaches near your location. You get to solve questions, go to the geocache, solve the geocaching questions, log in your name, and it's just a fun way to get outside and have fun and test your brain.
Yeah, so if you can see the screen, we put some small snippets of what some of our site descriptions are, which encapsulates our theme, which is supposed to be about sustainability and also connecting with our Issaquah community. We also got to help design a GeoQuest GeoCoin, which has been so cool. We started out with about 100, and about a month in, we had to reorder because so many people were actually completing the Geo Tour, and like more people were completing it than like at a really fast pace. We also have more than about 600 people who have at least visited one of our sites, which is so cool to think about. And the QR code, if you want to learn more about the Geo Tour and the Issaquah GeoQuest whole activity, you can scan it. Yeah, Ava, do you have anything else you want to add? Okay. And then this was one of our main projects this year. We also helped out on making some flyers and for the sustainability fair, and also presenting at the Geo Tour launch party. And we got to meet a whole bunch of cool geocachers and talk to them about what they love about geocaching and how we could incorporate sustainability into it. And yeah, anything else?
We can touch on what we learned from this whole really cool experience that we got to do. We learned more about the Issaquah community and sustainability impact. A lot of skills like interviewing, communicating through emails and all that fun stuff, and keeping to a tight schedule.
Yeah, thank you.
Has any environmental board member done the Geo Tour yet?
Some of it, I haven't.
Some of it, okay.
I tried looking around the Hardy Manning statue for something, but I didn't, I should have gone on the app and everything, but.
Any questions for Bridget and Ava?
Yeah, so as David asked, I haven't done this before. So how does it connect to sustainability? Is it with the questions on the app or?
Yeah, all of the sites somehow connect with sustainability, like the one at Confluence Park. We highlighted how the bomb cyclone knocked down so many trees, and how, that is impacting our environment and like forest restoration in the area as well. So.
And so the QR code is also on the City of Issaquah website, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so beyond the QR code on the website, do you have any other plans to making this more well known, like spreading this geo
Tour.
the geo tour, like link and all that?
So we did have a launch party for more of our geocaching community members, but I believe we're also going to do some more promotion on it more next year, I believe. Yeah.
Is this kind of available to do indefinitely year round?
Yes, for the most part, I believe so.
How long is this gonna be maintained for? Like, is it a 1-year thing? Is it for multiple years?
I believe they want to do it for at least 2 years, so this year and next year, and then looking back and seeing what worked, what didn't work, and how we could possibly improve it, and then based on those improvements, maybe continuing it or still keeping the sites, but closing the Geo Tour down.
I just have a follow-up on Karen's question. So have you guys reached out to ISD, Issaquah School District, or schools? This may be a good opportunity for the field trips, right? These will be a good opportunity to do the local field trips. So you haven't done any promotions in the school district or schools, right?
We have not done that, but we think that could be a possibly good idea.
Yeah, I think especially for, and I don't know what the questions are, I haven't seen it, but especially for elementary, they like to do the local field trips because it's much more manageable, right? So this would be a great opportunity for, I think, elementary and middle school field trips. You might want to look into that.
Great suggestion for next year as we dig back into it.
Yeah, so are you using physical caches at the geo site or is this at all online?
So we do have some virtual caches that people can access through the app, but we also have physical caches that people can write their usernames on or their names on to like log and say, hey, I was here.
Are you encouraging the typical geocaching behavior of leaving things or taking something, or is that?
We did put some like swag in some of the larger caches, but not all of the caches have as much space to put those things in there. So it's usually just people writing their name, and then if they want to leave something, they can, or they can take something.
And are these all on city property, or
I believe they're all on city property.
and they're okay with continuing to maintain the presence of those physical caches?
So.
Okay, very good, thank you.
I just want to compliment you guys on your presentation and your very thoughtful look at our community. It's really inspiring to see young people take on sustainability and caring about this community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just have one last question. Is this something you were interested in prior to working with Stacy, or is that kind of developed as part of your internship with her, or like have you been into geocaching for a little bit?
It's kind of something new to try out, kind of excited to try out. I believe you've
I've done a couple.
geocaching. This was completely new to me.
Thank you so much for presenting.
Awesome. Before we move it on, I do want to just say also, we got an email the other day from somebody from Germany who was going to come to visit Seattle and wanted to come to do the geo tour. So, I mean, it's awesome. We're getting people from all over the world now doing the geo tour. So that's just very exciting. I will now turn it over to Zoe and Matthew to talk about the sustainability policy with Issaquah School District and other work with Issaquah School District. Can I ask y'all to actually just come up to here at least, so it's the sound picks you up a little bit better and can see you a little better.
Yeah.
Here, let me get this out of the way.
Okay, we'll get to this real quick, but this is just a little, of what's next. But, well, let's introduce ourselves first. Not everyone knows that. I'm Zoe. I'm from Gibson Egg. I am graduating in 2 days. And I have been working with sustainability ambassadors for about 2.5, 3 years. I started towards the end of my sophomore year. And I joined the SNAP program, which is the Sustainable Neighborhood Ambassador Program with an exclamation mark. That is a contract between the city of Issaquah and sustainability ambassadors. Basically, so that we can all be on the same page and all have the same goals in mind. So we really focus on trying to align with those goals and working to advance the climate action plan.
Oh, yeah. Hi, my name is Matthew. I'm a senior at Issaquah High School, and I've had the privilege of working as sustainable ambassadors for just under 2 years. And I also have the privilege of serving as the student body president at Issaquah High School.
Yeah, so I'm a representative from Gibson Act tonight. So some of the things that we have, I say we, there was a few people that kind of came in and out and helped me on some things. But Gibson Act has been a pretty successful year for outreach, sustainability wise. We got 200 Orca cards to hand out. Unfortunately, we didn't hand out all of them. So if you guys know anybody who needs Orca cards, we would love to give those out. But we handed out about 80 Orca cards to students. So these are all free Orca cards that anyone under the age of 18 can get. And it really encouraged a lot more students to start taking the bus and start thinking a little bit more of how can I use transit in a different lens, in a more sustainable lens, and maybe take the bus more than driving myself every single day. And that kind of also ties into Carpool to School, which was another kind of highlight that Gibson was able to pick up on, was there were a few carpools that started, some carpools inspired other carpools. And it's just kind of a ripple effect of how can we inspire more people to take on carpooling when it's convenient, obviously. You don't want to be driving from Sammamish to Renton to Issaquah. No. And also I led a like town hall at school event, which is basically, well, I held the like precursor event at Gibson Neck. Whole school attended, had a bunch of people come up, talk about the projects that they've done, sustainability related. Yeah, super fun. And then also just working with other younger students in sustainability ambassadors to help kind of uplift them and find, you know, the best ways for them to work in their interest areas while still supporting the climate action plans of cities all over Washington State. Matthew?
Oh, yeah, okay. I'll stay seated. Yeah. I think one of the really cool things that happened this year, has been a long time in the works, is the passage of an official sustainability policy in the Issaquah School District. There's been a lot of research probably for 3 years in working with the school district to kind of like start planting the seeds to make this happen. And it was actually in large part but actually the city of Issaquah being a leader of writing like a letter of like encouragement essentially to the school district, that we were able to also get letters from the city of Sammamish, city of Renton, Newcastle, and Bellevue, I believe.
Not Renton.
No, okay, not ready to build. But we were able to bring support letters to the district to strengthen our case. And then work with them basically throughout this whole school year on refining the language, what it actually looks like in terms of implementation. So this is operational expectation 17, sustainability. And this is more of kind of like thinking from your like 10,000 foot view of what that looks like within the district operations. And basically what's the great thing about it is it has a built-in monitoring report function. So each year, the district has to report to the school board and the superintendent to prove that they are in compliance with this. So there's a lot of kind of built-in accountability to be able to be in compliance with this and continue to work towards these goals. And so, yeah, it's I believe it will be officially published on the website before the end of the school year. They had a school board meeting last night, actually, which is our last one of the year, where they kind of did all the housekeeping, which is great.
Yeah, so as some of you guys know, you guys helped with that letter of recommendation that the city of Issaquah sent. You guys, at least you guys had your name on it. But I remember a lot of support coming from here and a lot of people just wanting to see that connection between the city and the school district at large. So while I wish I had the final copy that they're supposed to be publishing, I don't, because they haven't sent it to me, unfortunate. But once they have it published, you can review it on your own time on the website. And be honest and give us feedback. If there's something on there that you feel is not enough for the school district, we can more likely assign younger people to kind of help push that, because we really were trying to find the best way to encapsulate everything, and also find things that can build up and support all of the city's climate action plans. So yeah.
And so I'm just similar to Zoe sharing with some of the Gibson Act like initiatives programs this year. I want to share just a couple really quickly about that happened at Issaquah High School this year. Kind of before we start. Oh, it didn't go to the next slide. Oh, there it is. Great. So that's okay. But I wanted to center us basically the whole intention of the project is really centralized around greenhouse gas emissions in Issaquah. And so we can see, like, this is a chart from the greenhouse gas inventory in 2022. And so energy use is a big portion of that, and transportation is another big part of that. And there's a smaller portion of various things that make up the other 6%. But these are our two main focuses, energy and transportation, in terms of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm going to jump into the first thing. So one of the cool things that we did this year at Issaquah High School, and it's happened actually at several other high schools across the area, is a turn off the lights day, where basically teachers will either dim their lights or turn their lights off completely. And the nice thing about Issaquah High School is there's, as you can see in the photo, there's a lot of windows. So when the lights are off, like this, there actually is a lot of natural light that comes in that actually in conversation with some of the teachers, they were like, I didn't even realize like the classroom's got that much natural lighting. I might do this more often. And that was kind of like really the intention of it. So like kind of plant the seed of like, it's possible to continue to have the lights off and save energy in this. So kind of doing a little bit of like the calculation of impact. We take the baseline electricity data. We take the number of classrooms as well as some of the more bigger common lights that we had off. For safety reasons, not all the lights are be able to turn off, but all the basically non-mission critical ones we were able to turn off on October 31st, which also was Halloween. So it's sort of added to the spooky vibe too, which is kind of cool. But so we take the average classroom daily use, multiply that out, and we can see our total impact was we saved 64 kilowatt hours of energy, which is significant in terms of its carbon impact. But what's more significant is the habits that hopefully that builds for teachers in different classrooms. So, yeah. And this aligns with the city goals, the climate action plan and BE 1.1 to develop energy efficiency outreach and incentive programs. And the really cool thing about this is kind of the school v school nature of it, where like school v school, like there's a lot of school spirit of like competition, like, you know, like Issaquah school, like we're like crosstown rivals with the Skyline and things like that, where it's kind of cool to like see how we can compete to see which school is the most like can reduce their electricity usage the most. So we can see these are high schools from all across the area, and it's just different amounts of energy that they were able to reduce per capita, which is really cool. And so these are all sustainable ambassadors from these high schools. And then we were able to kind of compare the data across the area. Really cool. So one of the the next things, one of the new things that we tried this year is we moved away from doing a Tolo dance to something called a spring fling. And Kieran knows about this because also goes to this high school. So, but kind of the whole intention was kind of a new ASD responsibility. So instead of like having just a bunch of plastic water bottles and one use like plastic cutlery, we were able to have more things that were reusables like cups, students could actually put their names on. We had a lot of the lights off kind of to inspire more of a natural feel, serving energy with just using candlelight. And again, yeah, the no single use items and more focusing on just doing things that are actually more permanent and more natural instead of just getting a bunch of things and then just throwing it out in more kind of sustainable nature. So, yeah. So we also did some worker card registration. We were able to register 28 worker cards when we passed them out at lunch during kind of our Earth Week on April 24th. This aligns with TL 2.2 to promote commute trip reduction and telework to encourage people to use their worker cards more. And we actually are planting the seed for next year to be able to be in freshman homeroom, to actually pass this out as an activity, similar to like, Jared actually knows this, but Eagle Crew, which is basically juniors and seniors will be in the freshman classrooms for homeroom to help them kind of do activities and kind of get settled for the year. And so this would, we're talking with the principal, Principal Connolly, to have this be kind of an official activity, and everyone would have the opportunity to opt in to get a worker card, which would be really cool. So kind of on the related lens of this, carbon commute count. And this is basically just all about how are students getting to school. So we did this back in the fall of 2024. And so we also did one in the spring of 2024, as we were able to kind of compare across that. And this relates to TL 2.2 to promote commute trip reduction and telework similarly. So there's a couple assumptions of like what that carbon footprint of each mode of transportation is. And this one also is really cool because it still has that school nature to it. So for example, here were some of the middle schools across all of kind of King County. just some survey data, and some observational data. And these were the high schools. And so a lot of the students here, they would send out specific surveys. What we did a survey and an observational count because it was easier to be able to count the bikes and the number of people walking or dropped off instead of doing the survey because it is easier in some ways to see it on just like an average day, like basically go for a week and you kind of get the averages of what happened each day. And so we actually won, in a sense, like the school v school competition of being the most efficient of traveling to school. I think a large part of that is so many of our students come on the buses, which is kind of a big portion. And like for a given school bus, you know, if you have 60 students on the bus, it's the same amount as if you have like 2 on the bus. And so that's, you know, and that's one of the things why we promote Orca Card so much. So kind of going through a little bit of like how we kind of do it. I don't want to bore you with the actual data, but kind of basically what we just zoom in our drop off emissions. We'll take like the amount of carbon per mile times the amount of cars that we observed on average, times the average commute trip with 4 trips because it's a drop off. And so that was actually a really big portion of our carbon emissions. And that's why, you know, just one-off parent drop-offs and things like running start, we're just counting for like 2 periods or things like that. There's benefits to that, obviously, like academically, like there's things that happen in the background. I know there's, you know, we don't want to like make people do things that they're not, because obviously people have to get to school. But it is a big portion, especially because it is 4 trips to school. Yeah, so one of the other things was parking lot reform. And so we would basically, this is all about like encouraging carpooling at school. And so this is kind of a comparison of the costs of different tickets at different high schools. But one of the really cool things that Issaquah High School actually really leads on is we give carpoolers first priority in receiving parking permits before single occupancy drivers. So really only, and they're really highly coveted passes because it is very limited parking at Issaquah High School. So basically only carpools and some seniors, not even all seniors, actually get parking permits at the high school. And so these are some of the suggestions for other schools that we're actually able to derive from our program to encourage other schools to give carpoolers priority and be able to have a system in place to verify carpoolers. So you have both driver licenses there to be able to prove it to them, and you have like the license plate numbers on file, things like that. And we were able to share that with a lot of other schools across King County in kind of like that school v school format. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Maybe in the interest of time, we can jump to Mina's presentation and then we can do just a couple questions at the end. Is that okay?
Sounds great. Okay. Can I stay here?
Yeah, you're good there.
Hi, I'm Mina, as you all know, and I brought to the board a few months ago the junior park ranger program that I was working on, and it was in development then. And so an update is that it is officially launched from the coexisting wildlife coexistence day that we did this past Saturday at Pickering Barn. So around 25 have been out there, but it was kind of last minute. So we are still in the process of continuing to push it out, but I have pamphlets here, the finished ones that are printed if you want to look at them. And I can also email one to Stacy so she can send it, the finished PDF out to the board. But yeah, so we have community partners and we are currently trying to figure out funding for printing them because they are on the pricey side. So we're figuring out ways to print them that cost less and also get potentially a grant to print bulk of them. But other than that, I've sent it out to all the community partners for feedback and I've gotten some. So we're going to make a few edits before round 2 of printing. But then other than that, I'm getting copies to each of the community partners. So we have the Salmon Hatchery, Issaquah Trails Club, Mountain to Sound Greenway, Trout Unlimited, and Issaquah History Museum. And then I'm also going to get the stamps that each of them use to like check off activities on the booklet. And then the last thing is there's a couple of other like promotional events that I'm going to be putting the books out at. And one is the Harvey Manning 100th birthday celebration that Issaquah Alps Trails Club is putting on. I am making a modified scavenger hunt that is promoting the junior park ranger program, and also they're
longer online virtual scavenger hunt. And I am also like promoting the actual program there and bringing booklets there. And so that is going to happen July 9th. And then after that, I'm going to be in contact with but just all of the community partners about upcoming like volunteer events that we could potentially like promote it out and push it out. And then I'm also going to try to contact the library system to see if we can keep it there every summer annually with their summer reading program. So that is currently the state of the program. If you have any feedback or questions, suggestions, all welcome. But yeah, the hope is that this will be a self-sustaining thing for like a little while, at least until we get rid of the copious amounts of badges that we had printed before there was even a program. And then maybe and I'm leaving for college, but I'm still going to be on the environmental board and checking in with the program. But I'm hoping that it's not that much work, but Alex will be able to maintain it.
I'm going to put a clap for both presentations. So we have to make it cool.
Take questions for these guys first and then we can ask questions. Oh, yeah, I was just wondering that if anywhere in the sustainability policy for the school district, if there's anything about looking into the school routes, because you were saying transportation is one of the biggest greenhouse gases emissions and one of the biggest things that the school greenhouse gas emissions are impacted by. And so if there's anything like looking at how to alter them so that they're more efficient or how to get it so that more people are encouraged to take the bus.
Yeah, so the reason why we don't have anything specific on there is because there was just too many things, and also that's not how district does their policies. So we have it formatted as they will create and implement a transportation plan. And because that is under sustainability, that transportation plan is supposed to be falling under those guidelines. And basically they decide, okay, we're gonna do these things to become more sustainable for this large sector. So no, but yes. Yes, they should, because like they kind of signed up for it, but will they do it immediately? Probably not. We're probably gonna focus on electric schools.
I will say, one of the kind of breakdown clauses of the policy itself was that the district will develop a sustainable transportation plan. That's kind of a continually evolving thing. We intentionally general because they will change like school buses, which have been delayed. We've received a couple grants, I believe, from like the state and actually maybe even federally for that. So, but yeah, that language is in there a little bit. So that's fair.
Yeah, so in the pie chart you had before, it's 61% of energy use. What I know you're prioritizing lights with the blackout day. What other main things can make up that 61% of energy use?
Yes, so that energy use chart, that is for the whole city of Issaquah. So that's kind of more like generally energy use. It is a very general thing, but like things like basically electricity, natural gas, things like that of that nature, and that makes up a big part. Natural gas emissions actually is really a big part of this. We actually have just at that yellow section, we have like a zoomed in one of like what it specifically what energies make up that, and natural gas is a big part of that. So that's why. We have a lot of electrification programs that we've been being able to encourage others of. And transportation is just transportation, like driving and things like that. And the city's been doing a great job of reducing their fleet greenhouse gas emissions. So that has been great to see in the year.
Yeah, so first of all, I wanted to tell you guys that you guys did a fantastic job. Personally, I feel this is one of the biggest wins for the sustainability team because, as Matthew rightly pointed out, it's not about how much exact reduction you are achieving at this stage. It's about building the habits, which is, sustainability is basically the lifestyle change for community, I think. And I think schools or school district is the best venue to achieve that. So getting there is the first important step, and you guys have achieved that. So that is great. So congratulations on that. And then I wanted to see, I know Matthew you guys talked a lot about what is done at Issaquah High School specifically, but I wanted to check how much of that, those or relative efforts actually translate into other schools in the school district, because the sustainability policy is being adopted by the school district.
Yes, yeah, that's a great question. We do have a Sammamish team. We're both members of the Issaquah team, based here in Issaquah. So we have members of the Sammamish team, who are at Skyline, who run a lot of parallel campaigns to us, at Skyline. We have a few members, sometimes they're in the Issaquah team, sometimes they're in the Bellevue team, at Liberty High School, that will run similar campaigns. It is a smaller team there, so they don't do like nearly to the extent of some of the things that we do at Issaquah High School and Skyline. But yeah, hopefully that will start being able to branch out, especially with the passage of the policy.
But it still depends from school to school how they want to, how much effort they want to put it. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, it
At
is.
this stage at least.
Yeah, but hopefully it'll come down really from like the superintendent, the school board, that'll kind of come down through the district operations as like, build habits for schools and procedural things, that can kind of, tie into sustain.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions for Nina?
Yeah. So Meena, I wanted to know, just out of curiosity, and I don't know if it is okay to ask, but since you said it's pricey to print this, how much cost ballpark you were looking at?
Yeah, so to print these ones specifically, it was $600 for 25, which is very expensive, but we got like really shiny covers and like nice paper, which we don't actually need. So we are looking into like getting a grant for them and then getting like thinner paper that doesn't have any finishes on it.
And how much are you planning to print? Like, do you have a number right now or not really?
Not necessarily. We're still
Okay.
looking.
I was just curious to see if you can, since you're looking at grants, if you can reach out to any small businesses or local businesses in, or businesses basically in city of Issaquah and ask for, sponsorship, because a lot of them are, as a part of their sustainability plan or sustainability policy, they want to actually put efforts in, involved in green efforts around the city, and especially local efforts they would be interested in. So I will also check, if anybody would be interested, but I thought I'll just let you know.
Just kind of adding off that, you should reach out to REI. You should reach out to their corporate, because they would probably be all over that and would give you lots of.
I think too, it's reasonable to ask partners that are giving them out if they would contribute to those printing costs, so I don't need to pay for the ones that I'm giving out. So that's definitely.
I would suggest also looking at online print-on-demand services like KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing through Amazon, or there's other similar sort of things. But I would guess this book would probably be printable for like $3 or so online, and people could then just order it through Amazon or whatever service you set it up on. And they don't print a box of them; they print on demand, one by one, and they have a machine that does the printing and spits out a bound little book, and it's magic. So and they've really got a pretty good price point for when you're not talking about thousands anyway. So it would be another avenue to consider. Maybe you could do both. So people who wanted to acquire something online would have that option. Or if you want to deliver something in person, well, that's another option. So,
Another place to consider for printing would be talking to the chamber, because they would have connections to like the Costco's and the Rallies and some of the other big property owners that, contribute to the community. And, I know small amounts are not as big, but it's a donation. So they get a tax write-off, the city gets the benefit, and they actually have some benefits from this. So go to the chamber and see, and I'm sure some of these big corporations in town would be happy.
Student presentation.
That's it.
Thank
One
you.
more clause. we'll have more students working with us next year as well. So we'll have more great work in that area coming up.
So we are going to move on now to the natural systems checklist that we have done. Back with the,
We should assign a Gibson Eck team to take care of our tree show. That wasn't an official.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Douglas Yormick, environmental planner until tomorrow with the city of Issaquah. So I'm presenting the tracking and monitoring of critical area code, which is the natural environment checklist and our tracking spreadsheet.
What does the till tomorrow mean?
I'm leaving the city.
Tomorrow is your last day?
Tomorrow. Well, technically it's Friday, but I have equipment turn in at 9 a.m. So tomorrow is technically my last day. Thanks. So the purpose of this is to provide the environmental board with an update of our environmental neighborhood checklist and our tracking spreadsheet, which is required by the Issaquah Municipal Code. So for the agenda, kind of go into just a brief background of the checklist, how it was developed, the tracking and monitoring that we use with this checklist, like what us planners will do with it, how we enter the information, what information we're entering. And then this is an old one that should not say Title 18 at the bottom. We've already done those amendments. So for the natural environment checklist, this was created between the environmental board and our former planning manager. We still utilize this checklist with preliminary information known at the beginning stages of a project. This usually comes in either right before and we hold a pre-application community meeting, or right after permit submittal, which we will then schedule one of those community meetings if necessary within the first 30 days of permit submittal. So the information that's within this checklist helps us planners identify the scope and scale of any potential impacts at the beginning of the project. And then using that while we go through permit review, we can then analyze what were the potential impacts at the beginning versus what they are once you have permit approval. So as a planner, we will take the information that is filled out in the natural environment checklist and enter it into our spreadsheet. Our spreadsheet has 3 different tabs. The first tab is for the pre-app community meeting information. And this is what I would say, this is all the preliminary information that we gather for the community meeting or during the community meeting. Once a project has gone through land use permit approval, that project will then move to the approved projects. This pulls information following environmental peer review if that had occurred. And then we have a comparison between preliminary and the approved information. And then we have a final summary tab, which is once a project goes through construction permit approval, now we have all of the impacts identified and are able to put that into that final tab where we have ongoing tracking and then identified post-construction conditions and issues. So during our meeting in October, I identified that the spreadsheet is a work in progress. Since that meeting, I've made 2 changes to further analyze a project's impacts to the environment and how we can analyze that following construction. Because tree code has been on my mind for the past several months, we've added sub-area canopy targets to the approved projects page. The original information only looked at retention and removals, the number of trees that were removed, how many trees were saved. But we never captured fully what the canopy is for that site in the spreadsheet. So now we can use this information to see how a project is meeting or exceeding the sub-area canopy targets that are in our tree code. And then second, I added a mitigation summary on the final tab. So many of our projects will have to do critical area mitigation, and that includes ongoing maintenance and monitoring for 5 years. So throughout this monitoring period, the applicant has to provide us with monitoring reports on how that mitigation site is meeting the performance standards that were put in place with their approved mitigation plan. So now we have a method where we can present to you as the board each year how a site is meeting, if it's not meeting, why it's not meeting, and ways that we have discussed with the applicant to get that site into compliance so that they can continue to move through their monitoring period. And then lastly, this is a discussion that we were having amongst ourselves is, and this was brought up during that October meeting. I think 2 board members had brought this up. So we've been discussing ways to relay information on impacts to our natural environment. One method that we discussed was having some sort of web dashboard to summarize the impacts that are in the spreadsheet. These discussions will have to continue when my replacement is hired, and then this can be reported back to you when the natural environment checklist comes to you, where you actually look at the individual projects that had community meetings that year. So I wanted to at least provide an update on projects that have gone through and where we're at with some projects. So far, since our last meeting in October, we've only had 1 community meeting. This was for the Newport Way Townhome project in Old Town near Issaquah Creek. 4 previous projects were approved, so they moved from that preliminary stage to the approved tab on the spreadsheet. These projects are now in the construction permitting phase, so they haven't begun construction, but they have either a site work permit or a building permit that's been submitted. And those are indicated on the spreadsheet in the agenda in blue. And then we had 1 project that was canceled that will no longer go into construction. This was the Hyla Stormwater Pump Station project. And I indicated that it was canceled with just a strike through on the spreadsheet.
Quick question, what was the blue? Tell me that, I missed that.
Oh, projects that went from approved, that are now in the construction permit phase. So they moved to phase 2. Yep. And then no previous projects that we've reported on have been completed. So they haven't gone all the way through the construction permit phase. But there are several that are really close to completion, and I would anticipate there will be several of them discussed at the meeting in October. And then with that, does the board have any questions?
Hi, Doug.
Hi.
So I think you did a really good job. I mean, I know you've gotten a lot of feedback from us. Just a little compliment you on the spreadsheet that you pulled together. And I think it has some really valuable information, and I really appreciate the different tabs, seeing it as it's used from, initial community meeting and then moving away to project. But the thing that troubles me is the comments that we received, Connie, today about projects like that are in master plans like Costco, the ones along Newport Way. I know those aren't usually in the community meeting because they have a development agreement, but how do we track those along the way? Because we clearly are getting impact from really large projects and we're not able to track them in the same manner.
I know for some of them, on some of the projects that Connie had mentioned, those were before we used the environmental checklist. So this was developed kind of in conjunction when we updated Title 18. So this was always going to be looked at as projects going forward. We weren't going to, I mean, those impacts are still occurring, but we weren't going to go back and plug in old projects into the spreadsheet because we were just using it as like forward looking. We've got this new code, we've got this new process. This is, we're going to look at it going forward. If going back to old stuff, if you wanted that into the spreadsheet, that would be a further discussion with, between the board and staff on how we would want to do that.
But I guess the question I have is if you have a project that has a 5-year monitoring period, so that's still an ongoing project, in my opinion, because it's, even though it may not be in here. So we started this in, gosh, I don't remember what year it is. I was on the board when we started talking about this.
Yeah.
But let's just call it 2000, or 2020, just to pick a number, or that maybe. But if there was a project in 2020 that was still, that got built, it's got its mitigation in place, wouldn't we want to be tracking how effective that mitigation is in terms of that impact, even though the project was already approved? Because what we're trying to do is track how are we doing environmentally as a community.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned that we have some of these big projects that we're not tracking. And I'm not even sure the environmental checklist would have impact even shown up with a Costco. Would it show up with Lakeside? Would we see that project, the redevelopment of Lakeside, because they have a development agreement? Would that show up in this thing at all? So it's not built yet. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah.
And I think it should.
I mean, if we issue a permit, yeah, we would put it in here.
But with it being a development agreement, do they have to follow the community meeting? I mean, Lakeside, that would be different because that's a newer one that may have to follow our processing procedures, but there's older development agreements that aren't tied to our new code at all. And
So this checklist includes everything that has a community meeting.
yes.
And I think what you're asking is development agreements that may not have a community. But I think.
Right, most development agreements, I presume, don't have community meetings. They go through a whole community process to get approved, right? So, but they still have huge impacts. So they should be tracked. And I'm asking how they do that.
Right now, not much is happening in those places, so.
Sorry, maybe.
I was saying, right now, last year, there wasn't a project, except for Costco was many years ago. It was approved. So is the question whether whatever is under monitoring time period should be included? Anything and everything that has a bond for monitoring should be included?
We're still spending staff time on it. We're still assessing to see if it's meeting the obligations in it, it should be showing up here, even though maybe Costco was built out, 4 years ago. They still have, what, a 5 or 7 year time frame to continue to monitor that. And if that is not meeting the objective of the critical areas work you required from it, we need to know that, and we need to figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should discuss what the purpose of this checklist is to, for the environmental board to advise city council on what changes need to be made to address these impacts. So if you already have a development agreement that's under contract, then the council at the time has already entered into the contract and the city is obligated to meet the contract. So there's not much we can do about that from a policy standpoint. The monitoring that has to meet the development standards or the performance standards, that's staff's job to make sure that whatever was agreed to in the mitigation plan is complied with before the bond is released to them. So back in the day, Land and Shoreline Board used to approve individual projects. That's not what environmental board does. And so I think there may be some middle ground there to see, is this capturing what can be useful information for the board to recommend some policy discussion at the council level?
And I
That's
think-
my understanding of what
Right.
this purpose is. Yeah.
And I agree with you. But I would say to you that, sorry, we're having this conversation, but I think that if we have a development agreement and in that they are generally complying with our codes, generally, I'm just, because they have to meet all the wetlands and all those other things. But if like the Costco property is not coming up, if the wetlands are not meeting the functions, and perhaps we need something fixed in our code so that the next project that's maybe the target redevelopment, whatever it is, or something down here in central Issaquah, we need to know that so that we can change the codes to inform it. And so what I'm saying to you is unless someone points out, we don't see, because we're just policy levels. And if we're looking to inform the council, we want to inform them based on what we're learning. And what I'm saying to you is, I don't think we haven't figured out how to deal with the Costco's and the other projects that aren't quite complying with their responsibilities for under critical areas. And you weren't here for Connie's conversation, but it's primarily dealing with the wetlands and the beaver dams that are basically we're running them over there in the Costco.
Yeah, and for the Costco gas station, I believe that is out of its maintenance monitoring period. 62nd Street roundabout may or may not be. I don't know the specifics on that, but I mean the beavers did work there, and a lot of the reasons, on why it may or may not be, or why it's not performing the way that it should is we had beavers come in and kind of re-engineer the site.
But that's something to note.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that we should put in the table.
Yeah, that's what the last thing that I was discussing, that's on the last tab of the spreadsheet where I have like notes for, let's see if I got this, share this. Oh, this is gonna look terrible, sorry.
Yeah, we're aware of the beaver problem. My Public Works Department is aware of the beaver problem. They work with Fish and Wildlife, and there's no easy solution to some of those things. But I think during the critical area code update, we did include some language because there's state law about what can be done as maintenance and things like that. So we brought that into our critical area regulations. But yeah, it does.
So I'll try to zoom in on this a little bit more. So this was the last tab, the summary of mitigation during monitoring period. This is where I wanted to have some information. When we receive these monitoring reports, I can put in, or another planner can put in, whether or not it's meeting, why it wouldn't be meeting. So for this particular project, we've gotten 2 monitoring reports now, and the site is performing exactly how it should based on the performance standards for that were in the mitigation plan. So if we get into a situation where year 4, there is issues because, you know, it could have beavers or just massive die off because of a heat wave, we could plug in that information and then discuss how we rectified that situation. I worked on a project, this would have been, I think, just before the pandemic, where, I mean, it was just a massive die off in this wetland buffer, and they essentially had to start all over again.
You know, some of those things informed the policy because now under the new code, you don't get buffer reductions. So you don't, you know, you maintain your existing buffer widths and stuff like that. A lot of that mitigation happened because you were given reduced buffer, but you were planting more. But, you know, the Department of Ecology and all the research shows that these mitigations didn't work as intended. And so I think that informed some of the policy to say we shouldn't be granting buffer reductions because the mitigation doesn't quite end up being what is intended. So I think that policy discussion happened around that. But we still have projects that are in the hopper, either for monitoring period or mitigation. So, yeah, but point taken. I mean, you know, we can keep refining the spreadsheet, and I think, and for you all to reflect, is it giving you the information you need at a level that, you know, isn't too much in the weeds, but informs you to have some policy debate about the issue.
Well, I guess my last piece to this is I would hope, since we don't see these applications come in, but as Lakeside comes in, it should be in the spreadsheet somehow.
Okay.
That would just be my request, because it's one of the development agreements to keep track of how they're dealing with, you know, and if Raleigh does, I think they have a development agreement. So they're already, that was before our new code and stuff, right? So I don't know if there's any others coming up like that, but I suspect Central Issaquah will come up with some form at some point.
Yeah.
Questions or comments?
Yeah, I like the spreadsheet, and there's a lot of information. It you know, doesn't eliminate the need for a human to engage their brain to assimilate that information and all that. One thing I'm wondering about is on the monitoring aspect, and a question that I would raise is, okay, here's all this information. Now I'd like to see, well, what's working well and what's not working well. Can I tell that from the spreadsheet? And there are clues about that in there. Does the monitoring that the city performs on these projects, is there a written report that calls out these wins and losses? And could that be reported on here in a way to help us kind of give us some clues as to what's working, what's not working?
Yes and no. The monitoring report, so there are reports that are submitted to us throughout the monitoring period, whether that's 5 years or 10 years, in cases where there's extensive mitigation. So we receive those yearly. We have someone on staff who actually reaches out to all of these people starting in late summer, and we receive them in the fall. We will review those to see if the site is meeting the performance standards that are listed in there. So if they did wetland buffer enhancements, are they meeting the percent woody coverage, species survival? They have the right number of species in there, because usually there's a performance standard for species diversity. So we go through that. We'll verify in the field if they're actually meeting that. So, you know, Jason and I will go to the site, look at it. For very large sites, we will contract out with a third-party reviewer who will then go out and verify the site themselves. And if it's meeting, good, we write them a letter. If it's not meeting, then we start to have more discussions with the ecologist, the applicants, and staff on how we're going to get this site back into compliance. And if it's not meeting the standards by the end of the time frame established, then we will extend their monitoring period an additional year and have a list of steps that they have to do in order to get the site into compliance. Some of that information I think can be captured into the spreadsheet, but it would be mostly on the mitigation plantings themselves, because that's what the monitoring report would be focused on. So if they're doing any vegetative enhancements along streams or in wetland buffers, that would be captured. We can probably get numbers of like the number of trees and shrubs that were planted as part of that. I think that would be something. And then we could also look at the end, how many plants, trees and shrubs are there. It's usually more, since you tend to get native volunteers that pop up into those sites as well. But that is something that I think we could put into the spreadsheet as well. But it would be like the number of plants. I don't know what else you would be.
Well, like tree canopy objectives, that would be something that would be measurable in some way. I think one of the syndromes that I think I observed is that, okay, yeah, we're going to make you. This is actually happening on a parcel near to where I live that's being built out right now. So the back end of the lot is trees are being left there. A couple of the trees are semi-dead alders. But the city requires them to retain them because, well, hey, they're trees and they're not completely dead. But they are going to completely die and fall over in 1 to 3 years. So say I. Because that's the life cycle of an alder. It would be better for those trees to be removed now and get them replanted with something else right now. Well, so I'm digressing a bit.
Maybe a segue into the tree code, which is.
Yeah, tree code, right. But so those trees, if the calculation for canopy coverage and all that was remeasured 3 years from now, and oh yeah, those trees which we thought were going to contribute to the canopy are now lying on the ground, and we didn't have to replant anything for them. Oh, hey, we're not meeting our canopy coverage goal, and that we reflect on that and we think about our lessons learned. Oh, well, maybe alders should be considered very heavily in canopy calculations because they're so unreliable. They die and fall over. Well, so that's an example of the kind of scenario that I think could be gleaned from the monitoring period after completion.
The one thing that I think we could do, thinking of your specific scenario, you have a project that comes in. We're not looking at it for very long after the project has been completed. There is a landscape permit. This is for the site landscaping, which the tree canopy would be covered under that. We could look at to see if the tree's surviving. But after that 3 years, I think we're not really looking at that project anymore. We will release the bond if they're meeting their landscape requirements for that project, and then we're not looking at it anymore. So we could look at something at the end of the 3 years for a landscape permit. The monitoring reports would just be specific, like tailored to a specific area of the site and not looking at the entire site. It would just be the wetland or stream buffer that was revegetated as part of that project.
Okay, thank you.
Time we'll need to move forward. Basically what we're hearing is just more information we can gather into this about more projects. Feedback that I'm hearing from folks is just as much as possible as we can get back to evaluate the project and how these codes are applying. But I think you did a great job. We appreciate the work.
I'll add that to my handoff notes.
You don't have to look at this spreadsheet anymore. Okay, and then, like, you're presenting more.
Do we have the tree code?
I can pull it up for you if you've got it.
So while Doug is pulling that up, I think what we really, we came last time. And we heard some feedback. So we summarized some of that in our presentation of what we heard from you all. We asked what, do you want another touch with the code, and you preferred another touch? So we've kind of coming back, and we have a set of policy questions that we really, today is our time to listen to you all, not so much to share, but we're happy to kind of quickly summarize where we left it, where we left the conversation, and where you all think we still have some work to do, or hold the public hearing with the Planning and Policy Commission in July. And then council's on recess in August, and our goal is to get it in front of council in September with planning policy's recommendation and your feedback.
Do you need it hopefully?
No, I'm pulling it up.
I think I can get it from another.
Hard to find it in SharePoint, but I got it.
Before, yeah,
I'm thinking.
are we going to be sending a comment letter to the council on this one, since we're taking into additions on this one?
We'll on the end of this conversation.
So, yeah, next slide is just the purpose, the follow-up from our last check-in with you all. Here's, we just kind of talked about, we came first in April, then we came in May, and we're here again. And this is the April 9th feedback. You asked us to do some more testing, clarify how the tree fund is used, address some concerns with the heat island effect. There were some questions for multifamily target, coordination with wildfire mitigation. There was a ask for a new approach with homeowner association, and to identify planting areas with flexibility. And then in May, we heard the feedback from you saying maybe there's need for more public education for homeowners to get tree permits. We need to clarify replacement requirements. It's a hazardous or a nuisance tree, it's 1-to-1, when it's a landmark, it's 1-to-2, but be explicitly clear in your language. You also asked simplify single family requirements, because as the homeowners trying to, deal with nuisance trees. And then move the tree removal section. I'm not sure what that was. Relief for emergency events. So a storm, there was a concern about, are we really making people come back and get permits and things like that? And so that's not the case. We updated the flexibility criteria to make it more explicitly clear. We heard an ask to save strands of trees, or, an attempt to, so you don't have like one single tree standing in the middle of nowhere, you try to attempt to save that before you are allowed to take everything out. And then you requested another meeting to review. So in your, next slide. Then we went, after your touch, we went to Planning and Policy Commission. The feedback they provided was, we had a category saying any lot 10,000 square feet or less. And they said, well, Issaquah has a lot of really small lots, or townhome lots and other things. So maybe create a category for 5,000 square foot lot or less, and have a percentage for that. They also said that maybe perhaps the city should focus on their own properties for heat disparity. So that comes through the forestry plan, because 30% of the land area is roads. You're not going to be able to, that's going to remain impervious, but can you plant additional landscaping around those to reduce the heat effect in neighborhoods that have that heat disparity? They also said deciduous versus evergreen replacements. Why do we prefer one or the other, and being more clear in the code? The code currently gives people option from a preferred tree list. You can pick any one of those. But right tree, right place, what does that mean? And then they also said adjust the hazardous tree exemption. More focus on tree giveaway program for some property owner that wants to take the hazardous tree out, but doesn't want to then pay a fee in lieu of. Maybe we could, work towards some sort of a program that helps more plantings. And continue to review for wildfire fire codes. They also asked for some example site plans. So we took that feedback and put it into the draft that was in your packet. Next slide. Tree replacement exemption. Proposed amendments contain exemption for tree replacement if property meets or exceeds canopy coverage target. So this is a policy question that we're going to ask you again, but let me explain what this is. So currently, if your property is has a lot of trees and your percentage is only 35%, and you're a very treed lot and you're at 60%, and you have a hazardous tree. Do you want to let that property owner take the hazardous tree and not have to do any replacement because they meet that threshold for percentage? Or do you want to have 1-for-1 replacement regardless of whatever the percentage canopy is? So there are pros and cons. One is easy, you just have 1-to-1 replacement, you're good. You had a problem tree that was getting into your foundation, but you have room and you can plant it. Otherwise, you can also pay fee in lieu of if you don't have room to plant it. If you want to go down the path of calculating the canopy coverage and saying, you meet this, then understand that the proposal is also lowering some of the percentages based on the neighborhood to the other. So there's that to keep in mind, because in Tallis neighborhood, for instance, we have 73% coverage, which we know there's no way any of those 2,500 square foot lots is ever going to meet, but it's all developed. So someone has a problem tree they want to take out. Do you want 1-for-1 replacement? If they can't plant it on their property, they can pay fee in lieu of. But if it was very well treed, we give them a pass on replacement. That's basically this policy question is getting at. Next slide. So obviously this is the biggest change, which is the average lot size, zoning types, and the 20-year canopy coverage requirements with the new. So we had a neighborhood-based percentage requirement, and now we're going down this land use and lot size methodology. So that leads to the policy question 2. We can bring this slide back up when you want to discuss that.
Yeah. Why did we change to this?
We changed to this because the original methodology was based off of the canopy coverage for each neighborhood, but it's a neighborhood as a whole. So the data the city has is based on this canopy study that looks at the entire neighborhood, which has maybe majority of the trees exist in HOA tracts that a stream is running through or wetlands, but the individual, we didn't have data for what is the percentage for individual lots. So you apply that percentage on a lot by lot basis, it's problematic because overall in the area, you may have 73% in Tallis, but each townhome is in 73% treed lot. So that became obvious with this methodology that taking a area-wide percentage and applying on a parcel by parcel wasn't practical, or it didn't make sense.
Thank you for explaining that. I just didn't understand why the change.
Yeah, and so then was this thing about the land use, whether it's a residential, multifamily, or commercial, and then what's the average lot size and what's the canopy target. So there's that's in the proposed code. Can I ask something quick here?
Yeah.
So going back to your policy question 1, my simple answer would be if the property meets that, if they have to remove one hazardous tree and if it meets the requirement for canopy, we should give them a pass. That's my simple answer. But I don't know what, as you said, what it changes for the city, or what are the, the bigger picture consequences. Like, and the simple answer comes from the thought that, I know personally that removing some of the trees, taking them down, and then you, without even adding the cost of the permit, or, the adding a new tree, just taking some of these trees cost like $1,000 per tree, which is crazy. Means if you have 3 trees, you have to remove. So that itself is a lot for a lot of house owners. So, when you add these other costs, and that's why I feel like maybe if they meet the canopy criteria, we should give them a pass. But as I said, I don't know what the bigger consequence or the bigger picture consequence are. So I was just wondering if you can, if there are any, and what does it entail for the city, or,
Yeah.
the other requirements per se.
Question, because I think that's the pros and cons, right? And so the con of that could be that say you're on Squawk Mountain, you have a lot of trees, and you have maybe 50% of your coverage. And I don't know what I proposed in the small lot is now, or before, maybe an example where we say that single family small lots up there, the so
For what size lot are you looking for?
for any neighborhood, say we could pick Dallas or
Okay.
Swell.
I think Old Town was 33%.
So single family small lot, that lot size is less than 10,000 square feet. That's the most common scenario, even in South Cove, Sammamish, or whatever. And so right now it would be 35%. Coverage. So you only have to meet 35% coverage. The remainder can be taken out, right? So, but it has to be a hazardous tree, so you can't take a healthy tree out anyway. So it's not terrible, but the other bigger picture objective the city has is the climate action plan to increase the canopy coverage. So the overall canopy, there would be a loss long term because you've taken one tree down, but you haven't placed it. But should that burden be on that property owner that has plenty of trees, or that should be absorbed somewhere else by city's programs, funds, or anything else? I think that's sort of the policy choice.
So I'm wondering if there is, any leeway here where you can look at how much is the canopy coverage for that particular property, and how it meets with the average, the required average for the, canopy coverage.
Yeah, we don't have that data at this point. So we have it for the whole neighborhood at a neighborhood scale, but we don't have it for individual lots. So we would have to do the calculation. So that's another cost.
That's another added cost for the city.
It has to do an inventory and show us how many trees they have, what species they are, what's the average, area that we calculate their canopy coverage. So it makes the permit process a little bit more complex, because we have to do that calculation to say, yes, you don't have to do the replacement, and you do, right? So we have to do that canopy. The other one, it's more simple and easy, 1-for-1 replacement. It's there, you get your permit the next day, because this is what. So there's the streamlined, easy. Yes, it could be a burden on some property owners that have a lot of trees, and they still would have to either pay a fee in lieu of or replant on their property. But we heard some public testimony at the last time, community members from Montreux, and they were fine with 1-to-1 replacement. They thought that was excellent. So that's what we've heard from the people that have spoken so far.
So just quick thing I had here on this was I was wondering if you can go with 1-to-1 approach, but add a clause that, in some cases where if any property owner feels like they have enough canopy coverage and they don't want to take down the tree, then they can request, to have that additional permitting check done, but that would cost additional to the permit. I don't know how the permitting.
Two types of permit fees to make.
Yeah.
So one's an easy pass and one.
Means 1:1, because in half the cases, it will be just 1:1 replacement needed anyways, right? There will be some, but see, for example, if I have to remove 3 trees, it's going to cost me $3,000 just for the removal. Then, the permitting process and whatnot. So in that case, I would consider if I want to put more money to give to the tree fund or not. So if the permitting cost beats that, I might just choose the permitting way. I don't know the logistics, how it would work out, just a thought to consider.
Is it easiest for me to take more questions to work these one by one? So you can get that. I think that for us, it's easier to do these one by one. So can we go back to the first policy question?
Okay. I think we have policy questions towards the end again. So do we want to just pause and then just go to the first and go to the actual policy question and then come back? So the first policy question was, should the city waive the one-to-one tree replacement requirements if the site meets or exceeds the canopy coverage target after removal of the tree at issue? So that's on slide number 14 of this is the actual question that's written. But I don't know if you want to do.
Easier to see those other slides with all the extra
Okay.
information to discuss than doing the questions here.
That's just like-
We can do it one by one. I think that will help.
Would you want this slide or do you want
These slides.
these slides? Okay.
I think we can hold the policy question.
Okay.
Okay, Keith, you had any questions?
Yeah, thanks. I like Raj's idea of having, giving choice to homeowners, but I also, I know we've been talking about the concern that homeowners are just cutting trees illegally and avoiding this whole process if it's too complicated. So, and if you've heard from folks that one-to-one is acceptable, I also wonder if, it saves money for the city and, means maybe more fees are being paid in the first place if we're not having folks doing it illegally. If there's any kind of way to analyze whether it would generate more revenue or, a satisfactory amount of revenue to just keep it simple as one-to-one, as opposed to trying to, make an exception.
Yeah, the pros and cons of one-to-one is simple. It's easy. People can just, apply, and it's easy for the city. It's easy for the homeowners. It's clear. The other one is a little bit more complex, but if you give people a choice, you can go the easy path or the complex path. It adds more complexity, but it can be done. Yeah.
I guess, and without, I think Dan was working on a tree inventory, but without that, we're not really sure how bad the problem would be of people avoiding this fee and just trying to illegally cut trees, right?
And most people want to, if the process isn't too onerous or too lengthy, people will want to comply. If it becomes like, a lot of back and forth and we don't need this and we don't need it frustrates people and then they see their neighbor cut them down and they didn't have to do anything and I tried to follow the rules and I came in and did this. So I think that's that balance that can sometimes play out. No easy answer for sure.
Thanks.
Well, I support staying with the one-to-one replacement. I just think that means that the city, at least, we can always update the code again. This is never, forever. And I think that ease to the property owner and ease to the city and us getting trees in areas where we need them is really important. So I support staying with the one-to-one. I understand where you're going totally, but I just think we need to try and keep it easy. We're trying to take on a big chunk here and let's see how we're doing. And if we have to reevaluate this, just like we're it was just adopted a year ago, let's reevaluate again. That's where I'm at.
I had a question in the comment for clarification. The 33% or the 35% for each of the lots and the lot percentage was calculated based off of neighborhood percentage?
No, that's the new proposed. So there are two tables. Currently the one in the code is based on neighborhoods.
Okay.
We're gonna, the proposed draft replaces it with the next slide. This percentage, which is based on the zone and the lot size.
Got it.
And the use. So if it's retail versus single family or multifamily.
Okay.
So these percentages are lower than the neighborhood.
Okay.
But these are based on what you can actually plant on your property versus, this neighborhood has 73% canopy.
Okay. Got it. And then, for comment, I would say that I like agree with the keeping it 1-to-1, just because I think that this has been in development for a really long time. And like, I think that we should also encourage replace or like keeping our tree canopy as high as possible with like community members and just in Issaquah in general, rather than like having people, because I get that that would be like ideal if we had a bunch of staff and unlimited amount of funding, but I think that also like encouraging community members, if they can, to keep their tree canopy, even if it's way higher than that their target, just up.
Okay, so, good conversation, but I think in terms of what we present to PPC, is there sort of majority for keeping it simple and 1-to-1 for now?
I have one more question before I could decide, and that I'm worried about the costs associated with making that assessment of the coverage for an individual lot. How would that be done? And what would the costs associated with it? They have to hire an arborist to make that determination?
We've lessened some of the things. If it's an obviously dead tree, you don't need an arborist. If you tell us there are carpenter ants on this thing and it's dead.
The tree in question, but the coverage.
The coverage, I don't think we require an arborist to give us. We ask you to give us the species of the tree, and then we determine the canopy coverage based. Is there a methodology, do you know?
There is a methodology, but it does say that a qualified professional
Has to prepare it.
So it's probably going to cost several $100s to have the assessment made. So I mean, I'd like to give them a pass. I'm kind of with Raj on that, but I think that it's impractical because of the costs associated with it. We will not get compliance.
Yeah, that's the problem we were also trying to solve, right? Make it easy, don't make it complicated when it becomes too onerous.
You could, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here because it does say that, but when you look at the measuring tree canopy, like there is a method for option 2, aerial estimation, where you obtain aerial imagery, measure the site boundaries, measure the canopies within that site boundary, and then divide by the total gross site area to obtain. I think you need a qualified professional to do that, but in the code, it says qualified landscape designer or landscape architect or a licensed land surveyor, and an arborist, sorry, skipped over that. So calculating existing and new should be prepared by
The smart homeowner could do it by Google Maps and calculating and calibrating, but average homeowner, do they have the time to kind of create it on a scale, kind of figure that out? But I think we won't accept that unless we change the code to say we can accept the homeowner's aerial coverage calculation. And then is it accurate? Is it correct? That'll be an assessment that we would have to do it again, the calculation, just to confirm, because it can get.
Well, lacking the tools to make all that happen, I would say stay with the 1-to-1.
Okay. What I'm hearing is that the exemption would actually add cost and work for the city in order for the homeowner to get coverage calculated and determine if they can get the exemption.
Yeah, and the way we wrote the.
Go 1-to-1.
Sure.
To look at cost.
Sure.
So I think it says this that we're hearing is.
And both thumbs down.
Keep it 1-to-1.
Okay.
No,
Thank you. So next question was the actual question. Let me read it out. Does the board agree with the new tree canopy coverage percentages based on zoning and lot size, or should they remain based on neighborhood? That's part 1. And part 2 feedback is there any additional feedback on the methodology or the proposed percentages? So the first is really simple in my mind, at least. We know the tree canopy coverage based on neighborhood are impractical. So going down this zoning and lot size, we're going to agree that method, that methodology is sound. Okay.
Sorry, just a quick question. Just the only value I can see in the neighborhood stuff is some neighborhoods have more proximity to riparian corridors and things like that. Is there any connection to, weighted values for canopy coverage in certain neighborhoods or anything like that tied to these percentages?
Yeah, anything in the critical area is gonna be protected anyways. So if you're in the buffer of a stream or wetland, the critical area code will protect that.
Okay.
Oh, hi. Did you call on me? Oops.
Sorry.
Did I hear you call on me? So sorry, I can't see, for some reason, I can't see your presentation, but I'm looking at what was in the agenda. So I'm just curious, like, I'm glad that we're reducing the canopy target. And I'm looking at the 7,540 square foot, there's 35% and 45% for the 11 or 12,000. So considering houses can be pretty large, and then there's the garage and the driveway, and sometimes people like to have some grass. How is that looking? What is the normal percentage when we look around right now? Have we figured that out?
On a parcel by parcel basis, what's the,
Mhm.
yeah, we didn't have the data for that based on our county.
Okay.
But we did do some sample site plans to say, okay, if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, then this is the setbacks that the zoning code has, and this is impervious surface requirements, and this is average sized home that people will choose to build, and how much is then left for the trees to be planted. And that's somewhat that informs some of these percentages based on those sort of assessments.
Okay. Good. Yeah, because when I was looking at like the 7,500 number, I was thinking, well, half of that could be house, and then so that's 50%, and then to put trees on 35%. I guess what I usually am looking at now is now that we've had a fire assessment at our house, and we're going around and removing all of the plants that we had within 5 feet of the house, and looking at limbing a lot of trees and things. So and I know you're thinking of this like what is going to be safe. Are we asking people, for instance, if they're going to plant a tree, look at it like what size is it going to be 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years from now, and will the branches still be 10 feet away from the house? Things like that, because that is one of the qualifications. What's the tree going to look like when it's older? Will the
Sure.
branches be 10 feet away from the house?
Yeah, that's a common mistake that happens. You buy a small little tree from the nursery, and then 20 years later, if you've lived in the house, it's grown.
Over your roof, yeah, and it's really common. I'm driving around now and I'm looking and I'm seeing, wow, there are a lot of houses that have tree limbs over their roof.
Okay.
Um,
And there are other things, besides fire, there's rodent issues. I mean, there are other things that can, there's some clearance from your roof and eaves and all that is a good best practice.
Absolutely.
So I think what we proposed here, our percentages are significantly lower than what they are at the neighborhood level, but they're manageable at a lot scale. And then these would only come into play, if we make the 1-to-1 for hazardous tree removal. So any existing home, these percentages would only come into play if you were doing a major remodel. It's either a tear down and rebuilding, or you're improving the value of 50% or more of your structure. That's when these percentages will be calculated, and we determine that you need to meet these standards, these percentages. So new and redevelopment, you would go to this table. Removal of hazardous and nuisance trees is just simple 1-to-1 replacement. If it's a larger tree, I think there's a section about landmark trees that were mentioned. At the replacement for that is 1-to-2. So landmark trees is 28 inches or greater, 30 inches or greater. So really large tree, so that's an incentive for you to keep that. And so the way the code is all written, there's the tree preservation piece, and then there's the tree replacement, and then there's these canopy coverage objectives. So we tried to put that at the beginning of the code of how those interplay with each other, but
Yeah, there's a lot. I appreciate what you're doing. I'm glad the percentages are coming down, so it's more realistic. And I can't see what the questions are right now, so I'll search around, see if I can find them. Thank you.
policy level question number 2 was really, did everyone agree with going to the lot size and the zoning methodology? And I think there's consensus around that. The second part was any other feedback, specifically you want us to further look into with these proposed percentages. I think we heard about multifamily, but I think a lot of that area is already developed. And so again, it would only come into play when someone is tear down or rebuilding or doing major redevelopment.
So the less than 5,000 square feet is not on here, is that going to be added?
In the proposed draft, I think we added, it's probably not on the on this slide, but that's 25%. And we're open to whether that should be lower. I think Planning and Policy Commission will definitely debate that.
You can see it in attachment C.
Hi, so this is something I was telling my mother about this actually last month. She kind of asked me about what I'm thinking about budgeting. Could we think about like the income of the areas before considering the tree canopy? Because I know certain areas can have to afford to plant many trees than others. My mother's actually from equity board, so she kind of is always thinking about that kind of thing. So I'm kind of curious if that's something you have in mind.
Yeah, so good question, but I do not believe we have data just to say in this area you have a different percentage because of that, but it could be based on, if the homeowner qualifies for certain discounts or rates or participates in the free giveaway program or something like that. So more on the programmatic side than on the regulations side. So, there could be programs set up by the city that help people with limited resources to be able to do this, helping them in a certain way. All right, so that was second question. And so the third question is, does the board agree that full tree canopy coverage requirements should only be required for new development or major redevelopment? So this table only applies to new development and redevelopment. So right now, the way the code is written, we apply to all situations, including tree removal. So be a change, like we've talked about that before. And redevelopment is defined as 50% of the building value. So whatever they're paying taxes on, not the land value, but just the building.
I guess my response to your question is that, the city values trees. So if you're taking a tree down, it's a one-to-one replacement, not just if you're doing a redevelopment of your property. So my take on it is that we should stay with the current code, which just applies to all situations.
Let me make sure I'm explaining it properly. So, we have the hazardous tree and nuisance things that we've already talked about. This particular table that we were looking at with the percentages was being applied to if you took down a tree, you had to bring your lot was not meeting the percentage, you had to upgrade the percentage. Regardless of the one tree that you took out, you actually had to bring your whole property up to these percentages.
Instead.
Correct. And so what I think we heard that the last feedback from community members and others was this table only applies to large. We would do this canopy coverage calculation only when it's a vacant lot being redeveloped, or you're adding square footage to your property or whatever, anything you're doing on the outside that impacts the trees. There is a separate tree preservation section that applies to redevelopment also. And so let me kind of break that down. So if you have an existing property that has you know, I want to do a calculation easily, that has 10 existing trees. And it's in, say, central, somewhere on the valley floor, it has 10 existing trees and you want to come and redevelop the property. You would go into this table, you would find out what your percentage is. So in my example, it would be, that someone's doing mixed use in the urban core. It's a 25% canopy coverage. But in addition to that, you have to look at, you've got 10 old existing trees. You have to preserve at least 25% of them as step one. So if you can save 4, whatever, 2.5 out of those 10, 25%, 3 trees, the big trees that you were able to save, overall, you need to meet 25%. So you would add some new trees and you would keep the existing, but your calculation would be 25% of that lot. That's what you need to comply with. If we'll talk later about if you can't save those 3 trees, then it's above and beyond, but that's a separate question. I won't confuse that. But so to answer your question, this table is in addition to tree preservation, which is keeping and saving the existing trees. There's a separate section. This is calculation of, everything said and done, what do you end up with if you're developing or redeveloping your property? These percentages of time.
So you saved 3 trees,
Yeah.
you cut down 7.
Yes.
You have to replace 7 somewhere else.
In that situation, you'd have to bring the site to the canopy target requirements. We're talking about new development. New development has certain percentage of trees that they have to save as part of the development. And then once that's developed, they have to meet the canopy coverage goals. If those trees that they saved allow that project to hit the target, then no additional trees would have to be planted. If it doesn't, then additional trees would be planted.
The chances are to meet the 25%, you would end
You
up.
would have.
Yeah.
And then for a lot of our developments, you still have landscape requirements that you would have to, so trees would have to be planted anyways.
Didn't we just say that if we wanted to take a tree down, we replace it?
That's with the tree removal permit. So we're talking about 2 different
So one's
processes.
redevelopment.
And then one is like if you wanted to remove a tree on your property.
But why would we do it different? Why in anywhere, if you take a tree down, even if you're redeveloping your property, shouldn't it pay into the tree fund and we should have funds to put trees somewhere else?
So that's why the only way you can remove the tree on anywhere in the city is if it's a hazardous or a nuisance tree. Any healthy tree you can't take down without replacement.
Mm-hmm.
But the tree preservation section is when you're redeveloping or developing, anticipates that some tree removal has to happen.
Right.
And so that establishes percentages of how much is saved. So you're saying that tree preservation should be 100%.
No, I'm not saying they preserve them. What I'm saying is they preserve to meet the canopy requirement. They've already taken 7 trees out of the city's inventory of trees, so they should replace those.
They may end up having to replace them because they have to still meet the 25% overall canopy standard.
But I guess what I'm proposing is a policy that says, if you take a tree down, you replace it.
I think in addition to those canopy
Right,
poles, right?
right.
So even if
So you have the canopy poles, and it probably won't be on the property, or they may put it somewhere else. They've taken them down, but, I'm just trying to be consistent. That is just, maybe I'm making this too complicated for you guys, but I don't have to administer it, right? But I just think that if you've got 10 trees on your property and you're taking 7 down to redevelop it, great. But let's put those 7 trees somewhere.
even if the lot still meets those.
Right. Part of the redevelopment cost.
Yeah, the more practically, if in that example, the 7 trees will end up probably being, at least 10 trees, new trees are going to be planted on that property in order to meet that 25%. So if you look at that way, you're going to get the replacement on site because that 25% canopy coverage has to be met.
But
unless there are really huge trees that are, covering 25% of the site. And those things really come into play with commercial development. There isn't much, in terms of good quality trees. Those are usually parking lot trees and things like that have been either topped or, they're not the healthiest and the good trees, but you will get replacement because they still have to meet the percentage canopy coverage.
Well, I guess I'm sorry I'm saying so much, but if you're taking a tree down, you should. That's just my take on it. And if it's on site or not, still make the canopy targets, but I don't know what the example.
I don't know which order you all have in.
I think Tom was first.
Tom, go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, it had to do with public education. So this is a comment that I had made last time around, and it tied in with this question about this code we're talking about only kicks in when we're talking about development. Okay, my comment was more about, well, yeah, so, but there are these other scenarios that trees are removed or taken out for various reasons. And why I wanted to talk about education is most trees, my experience, the most trees that are taken down in the city of Issaquah are taken down without a permit. That's my observation from what I have seen around me anyway. So I believe a program to educate the public about trees being good for the community is important. Because we're not going to achieve our end goal of certain canopy coverage without getting the public behind the program. That was what the public education was all about. And we're not going to achieve our end goals. I'm not saying it should be part of this code, because this code is specific about kicking in when development occurs. So that's not the time the education needs to happen. That's a different thing. And I maybe wasn't clear in my comments last time.
No, I think those are good comments. I think you're absolutely right. There's the regulation piece, then there's the city programs, and then there's the city funds, right? So capital improvement the city actually undertakes and does this. There may be a program that we run with the city homeowner. So it's sort of like this three-legged stool. We've got to approach trees from all three angles to make a difference. Most people, live here because they value the trees, they like the greenery, and so I think there's general community sentiment to keep the canopy coverage healthy. But there's also practicality when it doesn't make sense. So the trees really are in the wrong place, in the wrong type, and they need to come out. So that does that balance. But get your point about public education. I think this is the regulations piece we need to get. There's the public outreach programs, the sustainability runs about tree giveaway, working with Dan Hint's group with the urban forestry. So it's going to take all approaches to make a difference.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, in regards to that specific question, I think that and specifically when it comes to like tree preservation and whatnot, I think that especially when it comes to commercial development, I think, and like commercial buildings in general, I think that all of them should be held to the same standards, even if they're not redeveloping or new developments. And I also think that adding on to what Nancy was saying, I think that I agree that we should be aiming for replacing or preserving 100% of tree canopy when it's big commercial developments, especially because I think that they have sort of an obligation to be replacing it, even if them removing like 100 trees still meets the 25% tree canopy, just because I think that like taking them out for a parking lot is not a valid reason to not replace the trees elsewhere.
Yeah, and I'll ask a clarifying question for Doug. I'm reading through the tree preservation section. So there's exemptions here, and then we have tree removal approval criteria. It has to meet whether it's a nuisance for the purpose of replacing dead, dying. So where is that we say you need to save 25% of the tree?
So that's down.
Yes, you are.
Right here. So for minimum tree retention requirements for lots proposed for developments.
But those are only in these zones.
Residential zones except urban village is 35%, and then all of the urban village, mixed zones, commercial zones and community and resource zones.
Yeah, we should look at, because the tree, the other section should reference this too, because if we just read that by itself, it seems like these folks are saying 100% retention. So tree, tree preservation. Tree
Yeah,
preservation
this is for just tree permits, as a tree permit is required.
for all actions unless explicitly exempt, these exemptions. But then we go in and say, yeah, so we have a little bit of a disconnect in the code right now, I think, just a reference thing. So we, like what you all are saying, tree removal, 1-for-1 is handled in this 18.8.2050. That's, explicitly talking about what you can, hazardous trees and all that kind of stuff you need to remove. And then 18.8.12070 has minimum tree retention requirements. And so that's 35% of all diameter. In that case, we're measuring the diameter of all the trees and you're saving 35% of those. And in commercial zones, it's 25%. But that's when a development occurs. So that's pretty standard for most cities to have that sort of thing. So, because those trees, usually it'll be the trees where the building is going to go, or the trees where the parking lot trees. So as redevelopment occurs, those will get taken out. But 35% preservation has to be attempted. And if they can't do that, they can pay a fee in lieu of, but they still have to meet the overall lot area percentage. So new trees will go on that property regardless. It's whether they end up being 1-to-1, but my feeling is it's probably going to be at least 1-to-1, if not more, to meet 25% canopy coverage objectives.
But couldn't you change the language to say at a minimum of 1-to-1?
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? It's just that. So if it's more than that, great. But if it's at a minimum, then they have to.
Okay. You look at that.
So I just had a quick follow-up with what Nancy and what this whole 1-to-1 development thing is. And based on Nancy's, so what I was wondering was, I can see based on the landscaping requirements you're saying, you will make, in most of the cases, you will meet, although not guaranteed, in most of the cases, you will meet 1-to-1. That's what is the general criteria. So my question was, I can see in some cases the zoning will change, right? When you do new developments. So in that case, I do see the possibility where what Nancy is saying, it may not meet the 1-to-1 criteria because the zoning will change. And that is where it could be, important to have that 1-to-1 criteria.
As we connect these two sections.
I think there is some
we can look at what we say at a minimum 1-to-1. You have to preserve 35% and then replacement of the ones that are taken out, you have to meet the canopy coverage objectives with a minimum of 1-to-1 accounted for or something. Okay. Yes.
So it is past 8:30 now. We'll keep comments as brief as possible to continue. So want to maybe say later. So that the next one should be.
So we are on question number 4. So this is, I think we've kind of talked about 1-to-1 for hazardous nuisance and 1-to-12 for landmark trees. That ratio good?
1-to-12, though.
Honestly, I'm just very right.
I'm supportive.
Yeah.
Okay. Consensus around that? Great. So the number 5 is a little bit more complicated, but the question is, does the board agree to allow flexibility from tree preservation requirements for central Issaquah sub-area? If so, does the board have any feedback on the proposed approval criteria for such flexibility? So right now, city has this plan outside of the tree code to have a lot of their growth on the valley floor. Future light rail station, that's where the designated, taller buildings are allowed, more density is allowed to create a more walkable. And as that area currently is developed, you have a lot of surface parking lots with scrappy trees, some perimeter trees and so on. But the way the code is written right now, they have to save 25% of those trees, even though they're low quality, or they have to go because that's where the building is going to get rebuilt. So this is our attempt, and I think we've gone back and forth, taken some of your feedback to come up with the criteria for such flexibility. And it reads to say tree retention may be reduced from your 25% when it's a nuisance tree or a hazardous tree, or it's needed for site access, or it's needed for frontage improvements, or there's some utility conflict. And then I think this is numbered wrong. It says, or the first sentence of B is part of the F, which is the tree conflict with building placement, perform and intensity standards and cannot be reasonably redesigned. So if you have a tree in the middle of the site, they can't have a door hole and work around it, kind of a thing. So that's the criteria. And then number B starts after that first sentence to say, if the deviation from tree preservation requirements is approved, replacement trees shall be required. And such a replacement may be on-site, off-site, or payment of fee in lieu of. Replacement tree shall be determined based on one tree for 6-inch diameter. Total, you count the total diameter, and for the total, for each 6-inch, you need one tree. And then this is where we go above and beyond. So if you save those trees, you get to count them towards your canopy coverage. If you take them down because you have to, that's where the building is, you don't get to count your replacement trees. You pay a fee in lieu of, in addition for the city to plant them somewhere else, but you still need your 35%. So there's a little bit of give and take for the flexibility, with the intended goal that the city still ends up being on the positive side of tree canopy. So that's a question.
I'm supportive of your proposal with one exception, landmark trees. I think that there should be special consideration for landmark trees, that they don't affect them. I mean, they need to do more when I don't know what more is, but trying to put a building where a landmark tree is not probably appropriate, and there are some of those in that area. So I think we need to add a little more to this to protect those areas. Or if they take one of those down, they do even more than the 6-inch, because it's their site design. It's really affecting it. So I would ask you to add more to that for landmark trees.
Sorry, just really quickly, who decides whether it's reasonably redesigned or that subjective measure?
It would be part of our evaluation. The applicant would make the case for it. Other feedback on this? Generally supportive of the flexibility and add the landmark piece to the criteria. Okay. The next question is wildfire mitigation. So last time we talked about it, we went over, there's also this regional effort. The Department of Natural Resources is coming up with wildfire urban interface codes, and then coming up with maps where the hazards are. Then that'll go to State Building Code Council, that then will adopt those through the building code, and then the city will take action and adopt those. So because right now the wildfires in Eastern Washington aren't the same as Western Washington. The way the trees work, the way the all of that is very different. And so the DNR maps that were currently produced aren't accurate. So They're tasked with doing that. We don't know the time frame, and my suspicion is at least a year, if not more. But there's work ongoing, and once that's done, that'll establish the framework of what these wildfire regulation cities can be. In the meantime, I think you all discussed and you wanted to kind of have the ability for homeowner that does this assessment on a lot by lot basis to be able to do some clearing around the property. There's a little bit of risk. I mean, right now, the fire department uses very conservative methodology, but they're based, the guidance that's provided by the state is 30 feet clear around the structures and things like that. It's very, written one size fits all for very larger high hazardous areas. But that's not practically how they're doing it. They're not telling people to go clear cut and all that kind of stuff. They're being very reasonable. They give more good feedback. I think one of you guys discussed that before, where they look at your hardening, are you storing dead wood next to your deck? Do you have, what kind of undersiding do you have? Those kind of things are helpful. But as far as tree mitigation, so we discussed whether we allow nuisance trees to be removed, that we would move this section under the nuisance tree to say if you get a lot by lot assessment from the fire department and it's determined to be a nuisance, that you can remove it. So I think the question just is any feedback. Should we?
And go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to include this because we don't know what the timing will be for the new codes about the wildfire mitigation, urban interface mitigation. And I think realistically, from what I've learned through my assessment, is they'll probably just be asking people to limb things. So there might not be a lot of activity there, but I think it's a good idea to put it in.
Everyone, consensus around that? All right, that concludes the questions. And the last one is really, is there anything else that's missing from the code that you'd like us to consider?
I am concerned about the cost of all this tree stuff. I did look at other cities in the area to see what the costs are, tree permits, things like that. I would ask you to reconsider the cost on the tree permits. I don't know how you came up with dollar amount for them. And how to best assess. I looked at Sammamish and Doug just to kind of get a feel, because I've done tree permits in Sammamish, and I would just ask you to reconsider the cost.
So we look at our fee and annually, we do a cost of living expenses and adjustments on an annual basis. So during that time, that's a different title, like Title 3 that has it. But I'll be curious to see what you found in your research. I believe our free permit are $300.
Roughly.
Yeah.
6 something if it's in critical area, but if it's a hazard tree, it's free. So there is no cost when it's a hazardous tree.
And a hazard tree has to be determined by an arborist.
By an arborist, correct.
It's dead.
Yeah, it does take staff time and the city's costs and all that kind of stuff, and other cities may not have done an update on the trees for a while. Sometimes cities let that languish, so I don't know, but we can look at that for sure.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think that one of the biggest things that I think is important is focusing on not education efforts, like Tom was saying, especially for the community, because I think that even though most of our illegal tree removals, well, I don't actually know, does most of the illegal tree removals come from private single family homes or developers? Just,
A lot of people I've talked to that had issues were single family homes.
Single family, but even though I think that most of the illegal removals are from single family homes, I also think that the approach to the solution to that problem would be more community education, because we don't want to turn the community against us, but then for commercial bigger development projects, I think they emphasize that they have responsibility to the community to replace the trees and preserve the trees.
Yeah. building partnerships with folks, you know, I mean, this city is fortunate to have a board like you all. We have Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust that, and you know, the city's green, Issaquah Green Partnership that really cares about some of these efforts and it does that, but to build more on that. For sure. All right.
Does the board feel like,
Sorry, was Ann?
oh, sorry, I didn't see you, please.
Oh, no worries. Thank you. So I think Connie did have a good point in her comment earlier about the 5-foot rule. So is there any code requiring that there are no plants planted within 5 feet of a dwelling or garage or structure of any kind?
We currently do not have any prohibition against planting them. I think it's just best practice, folks, but there could be some public outreach and education around that part.
Okay, yeah. It would just help with fire mitigation. So it might help people in the long run. Do you think that's too strict? Okay. It's also very strict having people requiring that people have such high tree canopy because they might want to do something else on their property. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Should we ask about a letter?
Yes, we would like to have staff write a letter summarizing our feedback to council or to the commission.
Yeah, so if the board would like to write it.
Next that slide.
Ah, there we go. If the board would like folks to write a letter, then Stacy will prepare the letter and send it out for board review and send it to our board chair and vice chair for approval. And then we would pass it along to PPC and council. And we would work with Minnie on the timeline that we'll need to do for getting this letter together.
Like me to summarize our feedback to go into that letter. And then we.
If, yes, yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Specifically addressing the policy questions that were presented today. We, the board felt that the city should keep the 1-to-1 tree replacement requirement, regardless of if the site meets canopy coverage target or not, and that we should aim to keep as many trees as possible and continue to keep them to plant it offsite if needed. We agreed with the canopy coverage percentages based on zoning and lot size for redevelopment and new development. With the inclusion of the $5,000 lot. We did, we did agree that the full tree canopy coverage requirement should be required for new development or major development, and we would like to see 1-to-1 replacement as the objective there. Like any trees are being removed, so at least 1-to-1 with this new development. And we agreed that hazardous nuisance trees should be replaced at a 1-to-1 ratio, and landmark trees should be replaced at a 1-to-2 ratio. We agreed that the city of the central sub area should have some flexibility, but with the goal of keeping as many trees as possible or replacing them if they are needing to be cut down, and to add a division about landmark trees needing to be evaluated and kept. We agreed that we would like to keep a standard on wildfire risk assessment to allow lot by lot analysis that wildfire risk trees could be included under that nuisance tree and evaluated there. And really encourage consideration over cost and review of those.
Nice summary. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, if folks agree on that, give a thumbs up, we would like Stacy to file a letter and submit that to the planning commission.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you all very much for coming today. Definitely appreciate you coming back many times to talk about this issue.
And we will miss John. I don't know if he is an He's going on to do more good environmental work with a environmental consultant that we work with here at the city too. So the good work will continue, maybe not in Issaquah, but somewhere else.
We do work in Issaquah.
You might see another presentation then from Doug at another point.
Just not as a city employee.
Yeah. I will wrap up quickly. We'll provide written reports about written updates and then council updates as well. But Mina or Kieran, do you have any youth reports today? Okay. So the last things I'll do really quick are, can I have a show of hands? There is a urban forestry event at Confluence Park on July 1st. And if we have 5 board members attend, we do have to make that a special meeting. So I did want to see by hands if there are any folks who are planning to attend that July 1st event.
Can we get back to you? 'Cause I don't even.
Yes, we can get back. Yes, you can get back to us. And
I likely will not attend.
Okay. I can also include that in the email. And then the other one was our next board meeting is on right now scheduled for July 9th. The intention was to make that into a field trip. That is also the Harvey Manning 100th birthday celebration. So we wanted to check to see by show of hands how many folks were planning to attend the Harvey Manning 100th birthday celebration in case we needed to shift the date of the environmental board. So, okay, I'm seeing 5 board members planning to go to the Harvey Manning 100th birthday celebration. So then we will, Stacy and I will work to reschedule the July meeting most likely to a time when more folks can attend. Okay. And I think that's it. Thank you all for those online.
Thank you.